Today on the show, the pleasure of chatting with Artem Milinchuk. Artem is the founder of FarmTogether, an investing platform which focuses primarily on farmland and agricultural investing. FarmTogether owns 40 deals across 6 states in 13 different crop types. And prior to founding FarmTogether, Artem was the #1 employee and CFO, VP of Operations at Full Harvest Technologies, a platform for buying and selling produce. He previously worked at Ontario Teachers Pension Plan, E&Y, and PwC. I'm really pumped and excited to have him on the show today to share his incredible insight and knowledge. But enough out of me. Let's get him out here. Artem, welcome to the show. How are you doing today, mate?
Doing well, Reese. Great to be here.
Mate, it's absolutely great to have you here. And we're going to talk about a really interesting topic that I don't actually think I've covered in nearly 9.5 years of doing this podcast. I've never spoken about farm investing or farmland investing. We're going to get into that in a little bit. But before we do, can you rewind the clock and tell me how you made your first ever dollar as a kid?
Oh, man, yeah. Let's see. I think it was in 7th grade. My family is one of the first one to have a computer and buy a printer. And this was back in Russia where I grew up. And me and a couple of my mates, we started creating this little kind of summary pages of key topics and sort of, I guess, the early clip notes. And we're selling them for like some ridiculously cheap amount that barely covered the price of ink. And definitely it was not a profitable business, but it was a lot of fun.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And walk us through the story. You mentioned Russia. So tell us about the immigration story and how did you come to the US?
Yeah, it was kind of wild to think about it these days, but I was born in not even Russia, but Soviet Union. So in the 80s. And then Soviet Union collapsed, Russia happened. I moved to Canada in 2007, but I was born and raised in Russia, went to university there. My first couple of jobs at E&Y, PwC were in Russia. And I know we'll get into it, but the early inklings of what I wanted to do in life and this special attachment to food and farmland came from those late 80s where almost everyone had the still plots of land. And that's because the government couldn't really support its population. So you had to grow your own food. And with my parents and grandparents, we would work the food in the summer, the land. So we would have the food in the winter. And that's what gave me this early appreciation for the timelessness of food and farmland.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing because a lot of people don't think about how products are made, particularly produce arrives on our shelves. And it sounds like back in the day, before the fall of the Soviet Union, probably after the fall, that you guys were having to cultivate your own essentially produce off the land, right? You truly were living and breathing.
Truly living and breathing.
Eggs, meat, wheat.
Yeah, chicken, eggs, potatoes was the main one. Yeah. And then veggies and, my grandma, she would preserve strawberries, mix them with sugars, would have this, jam in the winter. So good. Yeah.
So then what was the decision to move to Canada? Why did you want to move to north of the border?
I think it was a desire to be in a much more global and multicultural environment. So I moved to Toronto, and Toronto is kind of like US. In Canada, it's a big melting pot for people from all over the world coming here. It's a very young city as well. And I was in finance economics. I still am. I wanted to be in a city that had a global forward-looking view of finance and economics. And Moscow, despite at the time being a rapidly growing financial center, not be compared, of course, to North American places like Canada, US for finance.
Interesting. And did you just on a whim get on a plane and come, or did you have a visa? Did you any romantic stories?
Unfortunately not. It was a mix of having some family friends in Canada already, and Canada having a very accommodated system if you already spoke English, which I did, if you had a higher education. So they have, I think still have a points system. They would look at how valuable are you to Canada? And so our family, I guess, were valuable enough to have the cut. And we came in 2004 to 2007.
Yeah, right. And are you currently still in Canada today, or are you back here in the States?
I'm based in the States since 2016 to 17. I am in Portland, Oregon.
And talk us about that immigration, because obviously, you're moving from Russia to North America, being Toronto. Obviously, for those people out there who have never gone through visa issues in your entire life, the US is one of the hardest countries to get into, but Canada is a little bit more accommodating. So was there always a desire to come to the US at some point?
Absolutely. I think it's the same thing of just wanting to be in the place where magic happens and where the cutting edge of your profession is. I think for me, it's always been really important to be the best at what I do. And around 2015, 16 is when the idea for FarmTogether really crystallized, but I was not ready yet to start it. So I was very fortunate to join a startup of my friend from business school. I went to UPenn in the United States in 2010, 2012. So my friend started a company that is adjacent to what we do now at FarmTogether called Full Harvest, which is that marketplace for fruits and vegetables. And she was based in San Francisco, so I joined her there. California is, of course, the largest producer of fruits and vegetables in the US and in some way globally. So I came there, and then I later on stayed because, again, this is where US is still very much the land of magic, the land of dreams. And despite visas being hard, look, I think all the most curious, interesting, ambitious people, they come to the United States, and it's just a phenomenal place to build a business.
Yeah, well, and talk to us about the early days of Full Harvest, right? That was the first. I mentioned earlier you're the VP of operations, so you're probably belly the beast, first employee. That startup culture, just no systems in place. So how did that help you, go on to create FarmTogether? And was FarmTogether already in the back of your head, or was it, something that was born out of working in Full Harvest?
It was in the back of my head, but I was not ready as an entrepreneur to strike out on my own quite yet. My 10 years before Full Harvest was spent investing in food and agriculture on behalf of Canadian investment funds. So I joined Full Harvest exactly as first employee. At the time, it was just myself and the founder, Christine Mosley, who I met through business school. And the basic idea of Full Harvest is really brilliant. It still is. About a third of produce is thrown out or wasted at farm level in the United States for a variety of reasons. And most of those reasons are not good reasons. So what Full Harvest does is that they connect farmers that have that number two produce directly to buyers that don't care what your apples look like. So what are those buyers? Juice companies, baby food, pet food. So anything that processes your apple, your zucchini. And I spent about a year there, really helping stand up the company, fundraising, hiring a team, set a financial model. So just exactly being in the belly of the beast. And I think the biggest lesson for me was not the professional aspect, so call it the business aspects, but it was the mental aspect. Seeing how Christine just persevered through so many ups and downs, and in early stages, it feels like every day you're at the verge of dying. And she just kept powering through, and she still is powering through many years later. So I think for me, that was the biggest inspiration, is just seeing firsthand what it means to grind through. And to this day, I believe that's one of the biggest lessons for me and for life and business in general. Is the people that win, they're not necessarily the smartest or the most creative or the most something. It's the people that just have the raw pain tolerance to keep going no matter what.
Right. No, I think that's exactly right. Perseverance and showing up is 90% of the battle,
Yes, sir.
So it's so important. But let's pivot and talk about FarmTogether, because I have a little bit of a background in, not a background, I've had a delved into the farming world from an investment point of view as a sort of third party. I raised a little bit of capital for a hemp farm in Denver. But just break down what FarmTogether is as a platform.
Absolutely. So at a most basic level, it's a way for people to invest in farmland and for farmers to get access to more creative capital options than exist for them before FarmTogether started. And I'll break it down. So first, just very simply how it works. How do farms make money? It's very similar to real estate in that you make some portion of your returns from price appreciation of land. historically in the United States in the last 50 or so years, land appreciated on average by 5.9%. Secondly, you make current income from rent or harvest. So same as real estate, you rent it out to tenants. Sometimes it's a fixed lease. Sometimes if it's retail, you also get a percentage of the revenue. What's different in farming is that you also can have a direct operated model, meaning that you will contract out your farm to a farm management company or family, and you as an investor have full risk of the budget, meaning that the inputs, the costs are all yours, but all the profit is yours. So that's the kind of the gamut that the returns run. And farmland as an asset class returns anywhere between 6 to call it 10, 11%, which is actually quite good when you compare it over the last 30 years to equities, to bonds, to gold. It has outperformed most asset classes. I think the only one that hasn't outperformed that might be changing is the REITs. Mm-hmm. But last couple of years haven't been gentle to the REITs in the United States, especially commercial ones. So I think farmland might be edging there. And then on the volatility side, which is a way to measure risk, and there's two ways to measure risk, but the one is volatility. Farmland is about 7%, which is comparable to bonds, much lower than real estate. And then another way to think about risk, which is I think how our grandparents would think about it, which is, am I going to lose money? And the beauty of farmland as an asset class, that look, yeah, absolutely way to lose money. But generally, when we look at the index, there's only been 2 quarters when the index went down. And overall, because of the fundamental trend in population growth, they don't make land anymore, improving diets, you have a very strong long-term trend towards appreciation of land values. So unless you're putting on debt or you screwed up your water underwriting, you typically will not lose money on farmland, especially over a 10-year period. And then, Reed, I know I've been speaking for a bit, so one last point and then I'll shut up. But another way you can lose money, and this one is really important for today's environment, you can lose money in real terms. So inflation. I think we, in the last 20 years, forgot inflation exists, and then welcome to today. Farmland has done really well in periods of high inflation, and overall, it performs, at least historically, has performed really well as an inflation hedge. And that is because partially, again, I just like, after having done bachelor's, master's, and MBA in finance, I like to come back to explaining things like you find. So, if there is a fixed amount of land and there's now more money printed, well, mechanically, land prices will go up. But then secondly, farmland goods compose hundreds of items in the TPI. It's the food, fuel, feed, and fiber. So besides your almond milk or your corn, dog, there's a lot of derivatives that are made out of farm products, ethanol being one of them, of course. So there's just a lot of great things going on with farmland that you don't have in any other asset class. And so that's why we advocate strongly for people to, of course, depending on the portfolio, but a few percentage points to be allocated to farmland.
But when you talk about the risk, you mentioned a few things, and I grew up on a small hobby farm in Australia where we had a dam and we had rain capture. Water to me is the number one thing that I don't think people, particularly here in the United States, particularly in Southern California where I live, take it for granted, right? Water to me is such a commodity that is discounted and given away because they think it's endless, but it's not. It has a finite amount of it. So you mentioned underwriting water. How much of a risk does that play into the overall success of a farm? And if you as you mentioned, if you stuff it up or get it wrong, what could eat you?
Yeah, and I think you being in Southern California probably will have a special appreciation for it because we seem to always go in California through this period of drought. And then this year, people follow, now we have almost flood. And that's normal for California, by the way. California has gone through those periods for hundreds of years. That does not prevent California from having a $40 billion agricultural economy, which, by the way, is the 5th largest in the world if California was a country. It just speaks again to the enormous size that US is and that California is. But to answer your question, water is a key factor when you're underwriting what's called permanent crops. So in our case, it's your tree nuts, it's your citruses, it's your apples. Water is a different beast when it comes to underwriting what's called row crops. So this is your corn, your soybeans, because in a lot of places in, let's say, Midwest or Illinois, you get so much water from the sky that you have a different issue. Water is staying on the farm. So what you need is to invest into tiling and drainage to get the water out of your farm. But in the case of West Coast, Oregon, California, Washington are the states that have 50 billion plus in agricultural commodity production. And underwriting for water means to have a really good understanding of water availability now and in the future. And it is a very complicated endeavor. One of the edges that FarmTogether has is that we have an institutional investment team that has spent decades investing in ag, has seen it all, and we use a lot of tech as well to rapidly and smartly think through all the interactions that happen in California's 200 plus water district. And for those who don't know, every water district is a legal entity that regulates in its geographic and administrative borders how water is allocated. And then guess what? Water doesn't work in your administrative way. It falls from the sky. There is a river or the snow falls. So you also have to think how it relates to different water rights on river basis, on canal basis, on groundwater. So it is a fascinating Byzantine system that we have to work through when we underwrite. So I don't want to, we could have a whole podcast just on that. Suffice to say that if you're investing in land, make sure that you trust, because you probably, like, I'm not trying to talk down, but you probably will not on your own understand water. So you have to trust the people that are underwriting water for you.
No, 100%. I think you've just given people a very small needle end tip eye view of how complex water rights are not only across the US or across California, but across the globe, right? And people go to war over oil, and they go to war over water at some point in the future.
So Egypt and Ethiopia, if you Google them, they're dealing right now with a dam. And then Australia actually has a very developed water market, very impressive for you guys, but it's another big agricultural country, phenomenal property rights, same as the United States, and quite a sophisticated water market, more advanced than California.
Any tips or tricks just as you're looking at that trust factor to know that the water's buttoned up and you can trust it? Like what are you going to look for?
So oftentimes, just as a checklist, you want to make sure that there's two sources of water. And that typically means groundwater and access to a river or a canal. But that is not always the case. For example, with Sacramento River in California, access to that river is oftentimes can be as good as having two sources of water. The other thing you can do is check what water district you're in, and then you can see if the water district has been, if we're talking about California, has been certified or approved by the state under what's called the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA. So you can see, is that water district approved for that? But, Reed, when we launch our deals, and a lot of them are in California, we're very comfortable, very bullish in California, despite what the headlines sometimes scream about. Oh, in a drought. Now, no one's screaming that now all our reservoirs are maybe at capacity. We need to flush them down the ocean. We talk about water in our slides. We explain it really clearly. And generally, I think, we feel quite confident in our water underwriting. And then look, lastly, farmland, one farm just as anything else. Anything can happen, right? So diversifying across different crops, different geographies is something that we recommend. And it's a way to diversify from the water risk, but to diversify in general. Yeah,
no, that's a great segue into my next question is, in my intro, I think I mentioned 16 different crop types. So what crops do you like to focus on for one, only yield, but two, maybe it's drought resistant, and three, it might be sort of, I think of avocados, right? Like I remember growing up, and I was born in the late 80s, and avocados weren't a thing. Now everywhere you see, it's like it's avocado on toast. So like crops come and go. Brussels sprouts obviously is another great crop that like was historically hated by so many people, but now through different cooking standards, people love it, right? So what crops do you choose, and do you have like a sort of an invest box to make sure you're buying or investing in the right crop?
Absolutely. So, and the boring answer is it depends, but I'll give the fun answer first. We do like corn and soybean, like vegetables, and we like permanent crops that have competitive advantages being grown in the United States. So, for example, almonds, 80% of almonds are produced in California, and I mean global production.
Wow.
There is a very strong marketing board because remember, at the end of the day, there is a marketing component to it. We had this Got Milk campaign, and then recently, I think Aubrey Plaza of the Parks and Rec and other fame went out saying, drinking anything but real milk is like eating cardboard or wood. So you get this very fun fights between different product groups. What's important to remember is that agriculture is the oldest asset class. Food is not new. Almonds, we've been eating them for thousands of years. Walnuts, 5,000 years. So this is not something that's radically different. We're not creating crazy new foods. So we are fairly bullish on a lot of different product types. Again, we focus on the ones where US has an edge. So corn, soybean, US is one of the lowest cost producers. Almonds, I mentioned. Apples, US is phenomenal. There's so many different varieties of apple. Right now, we're looking at pecans. It's a new the new almond. A lot of good things happening. Pecans, very healthy nut. Hazelnuts, US is becoming a large producer, competing with Turkey, which is the biggest hazelnut producer in the world, competing both in quality as well as in how we treat our farm workers, how we treat our soil. There's a lot of issues when we think about production of hazelnuts in Turkey. So every crop has its own story. But again, the major trends are population growth, improving diets, right? You're going from a diet that is very much soybean, potato based, right? If we're talking about poor countries, to becoming a very diversified, rich diet that's much richer in nuts, in fruits, in vegetable, in citruses. You're also moving to organic, right? Because look, I know I'm going to ruffle some feathers, but I will say this: like organic tastes better, and I'm not saying that growing conventional is bad. We grow tons of conventional, but there is certain, I think, taste and health benefits, nutritional benefits in more organic ones. And then some other trends that are only emerging is regenerative farming, taking care of soil, using less in fertilizer and pesticides so that you can more proactively integrate the local ecosystem. I think there's something about the soil and growing in a healthy, vibrant soil that gives a certain flavor and high nutrient density to your produce. So like I said, it's a boring answer in the sense that it depends, but maybe if we do another one of this and we can dive deeper in all the different crops and geographies.
No, it's an interesting thing because I do know, again, basic freaking farming is that some crops are good to re-germinate the soil when you're bringing in other crops. And for those people, I'm not trying to get too geeky right now, but I happened to grow up riding horses back in the day and next to sugarcane. And sugarcane was a crop near where I lived. And I'm trying to remember what they did to regenerate the soil, but there's different crops that you can bring in for a season or 2 seasons to regenerate the soil to help produce a better quality product. But you would know the better answer to that. But what crops are they that you need to sort of invest in that can help regenerate the soil to your point of like soil regeneration and water capture and all that sort of stuff?
There's a few different ways in which you can invest in the soil, and it's good both for, of course, the environment, but also as you keep investing in soil, it gets richer and richer, which means better yields, which means less fertilizer and more sustainable long-term life of the farm. And typically our farms are 10-year, 11-year hold, sometimes longer. So we're definitely long-term investors. A few different things you can do. So cover cropping, clover sometimes is planted peas to fix nitrogen, rotating corn and soybeans, after you plant soybeans overnight. don't remember which one right now, but the other one that grows better. Then there's small things you can do. For example, we had an investor that was really passionate about bird migration. So leaving a few trees on your farm, right? It maybe gives you half an acre, but then the birds have nowhere to be. Sometimes around the edges of your farm, you'll have little like ditches and canals, and that's where all the little critters live. So looking at the environment and what is the local ecosystem, and just designing your farm a little bit more to have more of that diversity. It's also just honestly, when you go there, it's fun for the workers. If you have a little house there or something, which sometimes those farms do, right? It's nice when you even drive by it. I think that's something about remembering that we're all humans and building to human scale. One of my side passions is urban architecture, which is kind of balances my agricultural passions and the countryside. And I think that's something about the core philosophy of coming back to building at human scale. When you go to old, European cities, for example, and all the cities in the US, the cobblestones, and it just feels somehow more human. And bringing that back to farming while also keeping in mind, you are still trying to feed the world, and most people don't have the wealth that US has. You've got to balance those two things. But again, it could be a whole separate podcast we're happy to do on regenerative organic agriculture.
I'm sure we're going off on a lot of tangents here, but they're interesting tangents because it's all around to your regenerative process. But let's talk a little bit about the numbers here. You mentioned earlier, I think you said 6 to 11% annualized. Was that correct? Or
that's right.
For returns, are you getting cash flow from these deals out of the gate, or does it take a couple of years to get the farm up to speed, so to speak? And I think it's the second question is: are you trying to cultivate or invest in deals to help? Like we buy multiple multifamily properties to sell as a portfolio in the future. Individually, we want to package them up. Do you do the same thing with farming and you buy individual parcels to then, hopefully the crops that complement one another, or do you just sort of more one off, and if the deal makes sense, you'll invest in it?
The short answer is all of the above. We invest in all kinds of different deals.
So back to the cash flow. Do you cash flow from day one?
It depends on the farm. Some farms, yes. Some farms can be a development deal that may take 5-6 years to cash flow. The returns on those deals are typically better.
Gotcha. Okay. Look, at the end of every show, like I could speak to you for hours and hours. I'll have to get you back, but I know you're short on time here. But at the end of every show, we like to dive in the top 5 investing tips. You ready to get into it?
Yes, sir.
Mate, your daily habits. Tell me, what's the daily habit you practice to keep on track towards your goals?
There's one new habit I've developed that has been really good, and I don't mean to sound like a bit of a douchebag, but taking cold showers in the morning has been magical.
Awesome. I'm sure meditation would be on that list as well somewhere.
Meditation, that one is difficult. I'd love to say I'm good at it, but I'm not. That one is a struggle, although it seems like there's a lot of benefits when I can stick with it. I started reading the Daily Stoic quotes by Ryan Holiday. I think it's a wonderful philosophy that everyone from, of course, the ancient Roman emperors to modern leaders like General Mattis of the Marine and Secretary of Defense fame. It's just something about do your best and may the chips fall where they may. And especially in farming where you cannot predict the weather, right? So many different things happen. You have to adopt a long-term philosophical mindset.
I love it. And one question we'll have to get into next time you get on the show is global warming and how that affects. But we're at the lightning round. So question number 2 is: who's been the most influential person in your career to date?
I would say it's been my mentor and my mentors and bosses at Ontario Teachers Pension Plan. I can't separate them. It's 3 of them that I worked with. Extremely thoughtful, passionate and compassionate leaders in the investment space. They taught me, I think, everything I know about investing and about approach to life. So I'd have to pick them.
That's great. Question number 3 is: what is the most influential tool in your business? And when I say tool, it could be a physical tool like a journal or a phone, or it could be a piece of software that you can't run the business without. What is it?
I hate to say it, but Zoom is great.
Right.
I hate to love it, but we are a fully remote team. We have to be because we're in farming, and guess what? Farms are not located in one city, and there's actually not that many great investors in farming. So we have to make sure that people we hire in our team is everywhere. Um, but yeah, Zoom has been really helpful.
That's awesome. Question number 4 is, what's been the biggest failure in your career? What did you learn from that failure?
And I would say it's not one necessarily big failure, but a lot of small failures in FarmTogether around early days of starting, not being able to hire the right people, raising capital. So it's just we come back to perseverance, where um, I think the biggest lesson is not to view failures as failures, but as feedback. At the end of the day, it's either your idea is wrong, you did something wrong, the person is just not interested. But if you have a North Star, and for us, one that we never have to doubt, like we're helping to feed the planet, we're helping to do it sustainably, we're helping the farms grow food. Like, you never wonder if you're doing something meaningful in life when you're farming. And so for me, it's always been the North Star that I know in my bones that what we're doing is valuable to society. And so the failures are just, well, this path didn't work, let me try another one. I come back to this, Edison story. I found 10,000 different ways how a light bulb doesn't work. So I think that's the main lesson. It's just adjust and keep going.
Yep, pivoting all the time and
adapt and overcome.
Yeah, no, and I think what you mentioned earlier about doing your best and where the chips, let the chips fall where they'll fall, because some things are sometimes out of your control. And as a entrepreneur, you want to control everything, right? As a particularly in investing space, but you can't sometimes. The market will be the market, and the environment will be the environment, and wars will break out across the globe, and we can't. That will impact your investment, and sometimes things are out of your control. And so yeah, definitely, that's a great piece of advice for people. Mate, last question: where can people reach you to continue the conversation? They want to be in your sphere. Where do they go?
FarmTogether.com. I would say pit stop number 1. We have a ton of great educational materials, webinars. You can chat to our client team as well. We love talking to potential client. And then if you want to reach out to me personally, I'm at Artem, ARTEM, at FarmTogether.com. I still read all my emails. I think it's endlessly fascinating what we're doing, and it's great to talk to people that are interested in farm investing or in working with us as farmers or something else in between. So yeah, Artem at FarmTogether.com.
Awesome stuff, my friend. Look, I just want to thank you so much for taking some time out of your week to jump on the show. I just want to reflect some of the things that I took away. I in general have the same philosophy as you do about feeding the globe and doing it in a sustainable way. Obviously, the world is growing at a rapid pace, and farming is at the heartland of feeding this economy and this the food of the people of the world. And some people don't even have any food to eat, and we come from such a country that is plentiful in its food, and you're doing it in a way that is sustainable, and you're self-aware of the things that you are trying to do. You mentioned earlier there was fuel, food, feed, and fiber. Making sure that you've got all the four fours in your investment, but also understanding other things that are outside the water conservation and/or water rights. How does that affect the investment? Drought, which we didn't even get into, but there's other things about germination of the soil and how you can have long-term crops. And at the end of the day, investing in this this hard asset, this physical asset, is going to be here, because you mentioned earlier, like, we've been farming since the beginning of time, right? People have needed to eat, and it will never go away. So I think that's really, really incredible, and I encourage people to get over to farmtogether.com to check out your stuff. But did I leave anything out, mate, in that little summary?
That was fantastic. I wish we had more time. Maybe we can do another one.
I think we're going to have to. I think we're going to have to do another one, part 2 in 6 months, and we'll dive even deeper. But mate, again, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll catch up very, very soon. Well, there you have it, another cracking episode jam-packed with some incredible advice from Artem. Make sure you head over to farmtogether.com. Check out everything they're doing over there. It's a really incredible platform. If you have any interest in investing in farmland for the long-term future, to put your money to work, and be a really good tax haven in and around being at a physical asset, because it has the same benefits as real estate. So head over to farmtogether.com. If you do like this show, the easiest way to give back is to give it a 5-star review on iTunes. And I want to thank you all again for taking some time to tune in each and every week to grow your financial IQ, because that's what we're all about here on this show. And we're going to do it all again next week. So remember, be bold, be brave, and go give life a crack.